Good evening. Good evening. Let me adjust this mic a little bit. The mic John has is picks up a little better in this one. My name is Rick Spear, and I'm the library director here, and I want to welcome everyone to the Lewiston Public Library. I was really honored when the Androscoggin Historical Society and John came to me on behalf of them and this new book to say, would you be willing to be part of this 5-part series? So we really are glad to be participating. Unfortunately, I haven't made any of them, so I'm really looking forward to the talk tonight. Just a few things of introduction. I'll welcome you to the library, and I'll also welcome you to Callahan Hall. And Callahan Hall is named because, as many of you know, that we developed the library facility over the last 15, 16 years. And for many years, we were up the Carnegie Building up on Park Street, and we had the chance to come into this Pillsbury block. And we did the initial design work, and the bids came in over budget, so we did part of that with city money, and then the Friends of the Library did fundraising to finish it off a section. But this part, the part you're in, the 50-foot section along Lisbon Street to the corner, we didn't have the money to do it. It kind of was out in the future. The idea was that we wanted it to be a cultural learning center, and we wanted to have meeting rooms and places for people to interact and just be able to finish off the library. And luckily, Larry Raymond was on board at that time. And Larry Raymond liked the concept. He also had a client, John E. Callahan, and John never married. He and his brother were in the insurance business, and they dabbled in stocks for years. And this is in the late 90s, and John Callahan had moved to Florida, but he kept his main residence, and he kept his apartment at the bottom of Bleachery Hill. And he paid thousands of dollars in taxes above and beyond what he could have done if he had given up his main roots and taken up Florida residency. But Larry said he was a Mainer, and he was a Lewiston man, and he was going to stay that way until his death. However, luckily, at that point, the stock market had expanded so much, and John's wealth had expanded that he was looking for ways to help Lewiston and help Lewiston Auburn. And he was extremely generous by putting $1 million in his estate for the library facility, for the Cultural Learning Center. He also gave $3.5 million to St. Dawn's, which helped finish off that project. But I might say we wouldn't have this hall today if it weren't for John, because at that point municipal funding was getting pretty tight, and it was pretty competitive, and I'm not sure we would have convinced another council to give us some more money to finish things off. But it was Larry's pushing and John Callahan's money that made it happen. So you're in Callahan Hall, and we have some good Irish roots to thank for that. Okay, without further ado, I'm just going to give a brief introduction to John. John's trail with the Androscoggin Irish really began in the 4th grade. They had a genealogy assignment, and he just got intrigued with his Irish roots. Some years later, a book really inspired him called The Independent Scholar. And it showed where average citizens could do significant research and really make a difference in contributing to the historical record. John has a Master of Science in Logistics from Maine Maritime Academy. He has 2 Bachelor of Arts degrees, one in German Studies and one in Political Science from the University of Southern Maine. John, as many of you know, by this point lives in Auburn. He's had a number of adventures in his life, been involved in education, youth development. He currently does business as Hometown History Works and Memories Made Manifest. And this involves, among other things, creating portraits of private homes and public buildings. So with that, I'm going to bring John Henderson up here, and we're going to get his take on merchants and businessmen of the Androscoggin.
have a lot of gratitude to bestow on the Lewiston Public Library. The library here has an excellent local history collection, and has for instance, the St. Joseph's and St. Patrick's marriage records, which is exceptionally helpful, amongst quite a number of other useful resources. And so I owe a lot of thanks to Rick for having us here tonight, and as two of his staff members have always been exceptionally helpful, Jim Allard and Bernadette Bovera, nice Irish girl. So thank you, Rick, for the use of the hall tonight, and also for a wonderful facility that you're providing to the community. Doing a great job on limited funds. And I'd also, of course, like to thank again the Androscoggin Historical Society members who've gone above and beyond to make this program happen. David Young and Betty Young have been recording the programs and making sure that the technology works. And Russ Burbank did the publicity for us and got the word out. And there were Diane Hesketh, who mans woman's the office, has also been very helpful in making resources available for this project. So by now you know that the Irish didn't invent Halloween, but they did invent trick-or-treating and the jack-o'-lantern. And it happened in 1867 out in Strawberry Patch that Patrick McCarthy died. And when Patrick died, they conducted a traditional Irish wake for him. And for 2 days they were partying and hooting and hollering and celebrating his life and having a good time. But decided to dispense with the traditional third day, and they boxed young Patrick up and started down the hill and out towards Mount Hope. Now, of course, any of you familiar with a traditional Irish wake know that this is something that goes on day and night for several days, and so the guys weren't carrying the casket, weren't in great shape. And just as they were about to enter Mount Hope, the lead man on the left lurched into the gate post, and they banged the coffin pretty hard. And of course, at that point, they heard a very loud thump, 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 thump coming from inside the box. And being startled, they dropped the box right there and stood back for a second. And then, as they recovered their composure, pried the lid off, and popped Patrick. He was still alive. So they headed back up to the top section of Strawberry Patch there in the cul-de-sac, and said, "What the heck? Patrick's still alive. We're going to celebrate for another day." And so the party continued. And but lo and behold, near the end of the evening, Patrick died. And this time he really died. He was dead. And so early the next morning, the boys took him off the table and put him back in the box again. And we're headed down the hill, and as they approached the gates, the eldest of them said, "Now mind you, boys, don't be hitting that gate post again." Well, tonight we're going to do two things. We're going to talk about merchants and businessmen, but I'm also going to give you an introduction to architectural styles, just so you can appreciate a little bit the diversity of the buildings that we'll be looking at. And one of the early styles of architecture in New England is the Georgian style. And of course we have many examples of that. And the way that you might recognize a Georgian style building is that it has a generally square footprint. It is very symmetrical, usually 5 bays, 4 windows and a door, symmetrically and evenly spaced. The chimney is usually in the center, and the chimney is usually a fairly solid chimney. It's not a small chimney, it's a fairly large chimney because often it's serving more than one room. This is a house down in Freeport where, what is it? Starbucks, I think it is now. Mitchell House. Next comes the federal style, which is very much like the Georgian style with some modifications. This isn't a very complicated drawing or complicated building. It still has often has the 5-bay construction with the door in the middle on the long side of the house. One of the main ways to tell them apart is on your average house is that the chimneys will be out on the end walls now rather than in the center of the house. And for the grander houses in the federal style, this allowed a new architectural element to be added. If you go down to Portland, some of the mansions down in Portland are the federal style, and they have these grand staircases going up from the center door, and that's why they wanted to move the chimneys out to the sides. So in the Georgian style, in the earlier period, fireplaces in the center of the house for a very practical reason. You get the maximum use of the heat because it would have to travel through some part of the house before it got to the outer walls. Okay? The federal style, after we had become a country, by then they pushed the chimneys out, often pushed the chimneys out to the side walls, and built these grand staircases right up from the center of the house. So when you open the door, you are on the larger mansions, you are overawed by this fantastic sight. Then came the Greek Revival style. Our revolution was based on democratic ideals fostered in ancient Greece, and this style was brought over from England, as were the previous two. And often the buildings are white and feature the columns and the triangular pediment above. And on all houses, there are a lot of houses around here that are built in the Greek Revival style, only they don't run the board at the bottom of the triangle, doesn't go all the way across. They'll shorten it up. There's just they're called returns. So you have the triangular shape, but often they cut the ends off. And in the Greek Revival style, the houses, another way to recognize them is that the house is turned with the short end towards the street. Okay, and with the Georgian and the federal styles, usually it's the long side of the house that's to the street. So as you're going around town, you see houses with the short end of the street that made the triangle available for your more modest homes, and also use made the use of smaller lots possible. Then there's the Italianate style, which it's a little bit hard to make out here, but one of the key features that will identify an Italianate building are the brackets, the roof brackets, just under the eaves. And this often they will also have a flat or almost flat roof as this building does. And if you've been down to Portland and been to the Victoria, so-called Victoria Mansion, that's an Italianate style, Italian via style building. And so when you see the brackets, another feature of Italianate buildings are the bay windows. So when you see bay windows, that comes from this style that became popular in the 1850s. Now we get a bit of all of Europe in here. We've got Greece, we've got the Italians, we also have the French. The buildings with the roofs that are almost vertical are called, it's the Second Empire style, came from France. It's referred to as a mansard roof after the gentleman who invented them in France. And then there's the Queen Anne style. It has nothing to do with Queen Anne, but Queen Anne buildings are recognized by the tower, usually on the corner. And it's also a fairly asymmetrical style, where your Georgian buildings have the 5 equally spaced bays. Your Queen Anne home or your Queen Anne building, such as this one, will be asymmetrical because there's only one tower on it.